I'm Melissa Ridgen. Welcome to APTN National News. Starting off in Ottawa, where Canadian government lawyers argued in federal court today against a Canadian Human Rights Tribunal ruling to compensate First Nations children victimized by the child welfare system. Jamie Pashagumskum reports.
So the tribunal did not have the benefit of submissions.
Canada says it wants to compensate victims of its child welfare system, but is concerned the tribunal's ruling won't do that properly, because children and families were impacted differently.
Getting decisions right involves review. If it leads to some delay in compensating the victims of Canada's underfunding, that is the system we have.
Frater argues the tribunal order doesn't include those impacted prior to 2006, and that cost could soar into the billions. Anishinaabe Nation Deputy Grand Chief Walter Naveau says money shouldn't be the primary concern.
How could you put a figure on the damage done? I think it's an opportunity where you're giving back the dignity to the people to recognize by a compensation package, we hear you, we're willing to deal with you, let's do something about it.
Instead, Canada wants to proceed with a class action lawsuit initiated in March. If successful, it would force government to compensate impacted individuals harmed by the system between 1991 and 2019. Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller and Justice Minister David Lametti issued a statement Monday, just moments before the court hearing began, saying Canada is committed to certifying the class action suit. They say, "We want to clearly state that Canada agrees it must fairly and equitably compensate First Nations children who have been negatively impacted by the child and family policies. What we must do is seek an approach that will provide fair and equitable resolution." Anishinaabe Nation lawyer Julian Faulkner says a one-time payment agreement is not necessary, and Canada has options.
It strains credibility in the extreme to suggest that they're here to protect those not included in the order, because there's a simple answer to that. Accept the order and then compensate others. There's nothing stopping Canada from adding to the compensation, from creating more remedies, but they're here today to stop remedies.
Government lawyers say the resources required to administer those payments would be considerable and would cause irreputable harm in wasted resources for Canada. Cindy Blackstock of the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society disagrees.
Marina never lived long enough. They're giving very little weight to the real human tragedy that this case unfolds. The tribunal found that they're unnecessarily separating families, and Canada's discrimination is leading to the deaths of some children. So this waiting around might make sense for them bureaucratically or even politically, but for these children, they'll never get their childhoods back. And in some cases, they'll never get their lives back. And in some cases, they'll never get their families back. And that's what Canada isn't paying attention to.
Lawyers for the Assembly of First Nations and the Caring Society want Canada's application for judicial review postponed, and for the tribunal to work with stakeholders to create a compensation process. If the government chooses, it could then continue with its application for stay. The hearings continue tomorrow. Jamie Pashagumskum, APTN National News, Ottawa.
To Vancouver now, where a rally was held urging the federal government to stop that fight against the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal's decision. Tina House has more.
So we come together and we unite. And
on the eve of this week's court hearings, nearly 200 people gathered at Main and Hastings in Vancouver to demand the federal government pay the compensation.
But they were set up to fail from the get-go. And now we're rising and we're standing together and we're saying no more. No more! We say no more stolen children. We say bring our kids home.
Many faces here were in foster care and still feel the pain and loss of that experience.
I was in foster care in British Columbia for 16 years. I was apprehended when I was 3 years old. My mom then moved to the downtown east side where she spent the rest of her life where she died.
Others in the crowd are grieving the loss of loved ones that died after aging out of care, like 29-year-old Quinton Reese, who died a few weeks ago after struggling with addictions. His mother and son were here to honor him. At a press conference held prior to the rally, Don Johnson, who was also formerly in care, spoke of their tragic loss.
Quentin changed my life. He had this really powerful energy, this really bright light within him. And even then, you know, he struggled with things. But you didn't see that part of him. You saw this love and this energy and this ability to connect people. And even now, that's what he's doing. He's connecting all of us.
Robin Raw-Eater, now a mother herself, also spoke at the press conference.
Children are suffering every single day. Children are dying in the child welfare system. Nobody is being held accountable.
The Trudeau government challenging this is also an act of genocide. This is the act of a destruction of culture, language, and life. He thinks he can spend billions of dollars taking children to court. What is reconciliation if he keeps on taking these children to court?
As the drums rang out and the walk began, many here are hopeful that one day they will see compensation. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
A child welfare authority in Manitoba was the victim of a cyber attack last week that shut down its computer systems. The Southern First Nations Network of Care says RCMP are investigating. Brittany Hobson brings us more.
On November 21st, the Southern First Nations Network of Care's internal network was hit with a cyber attack. The organization is one of 4 authorities in Manitoba who manages child and family services agencies. Yes, Justin Richard is an IT manager with one of those agencies.
On Thursday morning, it was a virus breach. At the time, the IT department took all of they followed their disaster recovery plan as best as they possibly could. They identified the issue, they isolated the issue, they tried to cleanse it the best they could, and they tried to restore from backup.
The organization immediately shut down all systems, leaving 8 agencies without access to important day-to-day programs.
Quite simply, we do not have access to any sort of computers.
Cleman Hornbrook is the acting CEO of the authority. She says there was a plan in place for agencies to access the Child and Family Services system.
All agencies have implemented their contingency plans, and they are working with their teams to ensure that there's the least amount of disruption.
RCMP are investigating the attack. Hornbrook would not say if attackers demanded a ransom. Brett Callow is a cybersecurity expert with the company Emsisoft. He says these attacks are hard to investigate. In the past year, the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations and the government of Nunavut have also been a victim to these attacks. Callow says it can happen to anyone.
The malware is spread through mass spam campaigns or through people scanning the internet looking for vulnerable systems that can be accessed.
He says these crimes are on the rise, but there's limited data available.
It's really hard to measure the extent of the problem because most private companies will sweep ransomware attacks under the carpet as they possibly can. It's not information that they want to be in the public domain.
The government said in a news release on Sunday, the province has offered technical support and other resources to assist the Southern First Nations Network of Care. And the province is also limiting remote access to its computer systems to ensure security as this issue is resolved. In the meantime, the system is still down, and there's no word on when or if it will be back up and running. Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Manitoba's Auditor General says that children in foster care in the province are at risk because the government isn't funding and managing the CFS system adequately. CTV's Michelle Gerwing explains.
There are close to 10,000 children in care in Manitoba. A new report from Manitoba's Auditor General says there are weaknesses in the way foster homes are managed. One that stands out to Norm Ricard is how often unannounced visits were done.
Because it was like a full expectation that there would be many And it was like, well, basically none.
Of the 43 recommendations, the first addresses funding.
It's not possible for the department to say with any assurance that they know that authorities and agencies are properly funded, because they could not justify that to us.
Ricard says at the time of the audit, agencies were using money earmarked for other purposes, meaning higher caseloads in other areas. Manitoba's Minister of Families, Heather Stephenson, says a new funding model is already in place.
The Auditor General's review was done at a snapshot in time. That was prior to the introduction of Bill C-92. It was prior to our movement to block funding. And so many of this thing, the landscape has changed significantly since the review has taken place.
Opposition leader Wab Kinew says it's not just the Auditor General who's come to these conclusions.
All the experts who have looked at this issue have told us that these vulnerable children in Manitoba are not being dealt with fairly. And when we take a look at the block funding change this government made, we can conclude that it's resulting in less money per child.
Ricard says the block funding model was announced while they were finalizing this report.
It's so new, we would have to let it be in play for a year or two before we would audit something like that.
And a planned follow-up report is scheduled for September of 2021. Michelle Gerwing, CTV News, Winnipeg.
We got to take a quick break, but when we come back, non-Indigenous folks near St. Catharines, Ontario get a history lesson about Haudenosaunee hunting rights. First, though, here's tomorrow's weather forecast. Off to the east coast, we've got 3 in rain in St. John's, 5 in sunshine in Charlottetown. Happy Valley, Goose Bay, snow and 3 degrees. Kuujjuaq, 1 and snow. Saguenay, snowing and 2 degrees. Chibougamau, -1 and snow. North Bay, 5 and cloudy. Sault Ste. Marie, mix of sun and cloud and 4 degrees. -4 for Sewell Lookout, mostly sunny skies. -5 and snow in Big Trout Lake. -6 for the Paw and Norway House and Thompson. -8 in Pucketwagan and snow. -2 and snow for Winnipeg. -5 and snow for Brandon and Dauphin. -4 sunshine for Saskatoon. -2 in sunny and Swift Current. -9 in snow in Stony Rapids. -7 in snow in La Ronge. Welcome back. A young filmmaker in Alberta is having to change his film about his nation after Canada Post lost a package of original prints. APTN's Chris Stewart has the story.
They handed it to me, and I was like, oh.
This is all that Seth Cardinal Dodging Horse received from Canada Post.
Inside and there was nothing.
There should have been 12 rolls of developed film inside. Instead, he received an empty envelope. Seth has spent the last year and a half researching and working on a Super 8 film about his family history and the Tsuut'ina Nation bordering southwest Calgary. He went to museums across Canada and made discoveries that he filmed.
And as I was looking in collections in these museums, I would find family objects that had belonged to my family, and I would find photographs of my family, and I'd find them wearing those objects.
Months of research paid off for Dodging Horse.
So I'd find photographs, I'd find those objects, and then I would look at the person who collected them, their field notes, and then I would look at books that they had published, and I would put all those things together, and I'd be able to find out that this belonged to that person.
Dodging Horse says the objects he found were not on display at the museums, but in storage. He is hoping to have the objects repatriated to their rightful owners. He was waiting for his film to be sent back to him from the film developers. The empty package is what he received instead.
Like, I was just like in disbelief. I was pretty angry and upset, but I was also like, you know, the irony of making a movie about lost objects itself ended up, I don't know, lost or hopefully not stolen. Hopefully, you know, it's an accident.
Dodging Horse is in communication with Canada Post. They told him and APTN that 7 of the 12 rolls of film have been found. In a statement, Canada Post says they regret that the package was delivered in poor condition and missing contents and let him down. They say they are searching for the other rolls. The film developer did send a digital backup to Seth, so his project can go ahead. But it won't be the same. He wanted it to be on film, not digital, for his first ever project.
You know, I'm shooting on an analog film format, so I might as well, while I'm doing this, you know, take up the challenge of editing it, splicing the tape together, you know, approaching it in a really hands-on way, and So I'm hoping that the rest of the film will turn up.
If the other film roles show up, he can complete his film the way he envisioned. If not, at least he could still finish and tell the story he wanted. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Tsuut'ina Nation.
The Haudenosaunee white-tailed deer harvest is underway in southern Ontario, but not everyone's happy with those treaty rights that are being exercised. Elena McDougall reports.
Yeah, they're trying to stop us from doing our hunt or whatever.
Animal rights groups have been protesting at Short Hills Park since deer harvesting resumed on the land there 7 years ago.
We're here to keep the peace and understand each side. The Haudenosaunee have their treaty rights of their traditional lands here, and they have the right to hunt.
A sign announces closure of the park during the harvest. It also references provincial legislation and Section 35 of the Constitution, which affirms the treaty rights of Haudenosaunee to harvest.
Two of the biggest misconceptions would be the treaty itself and the different elements of the treaty and what constitutional rights exist for the Haudenosaunee Confederacy in the case of this harvest.
On this particular evening, a small group demonstrates quietly and is not holding signs. A vigil planned by local animal rights groups was canceled in the wake of racist comments posted on social media. When one user commented, "Disgusting, hope they shoot themselves," another invited them to come to the park on November 14th and stand up for the deer. The user went on to write, "The Ontario Park said there's no opposition, but clearly there is. We need to be visible." The two groups say they do not oppose who is hunting in the park, but rather the hunt itself. In a statement, Short Hills Wildlife Alliance and Niagara Action for Animals expressed regret that the comments were made on their pages. They also said steps are being taken to ensure such language is not perpetuated in the future. APTN reached out to both groups to clarify what steps are being taken, but did not receive a response. Another comment stating, "Too bad they didn't kill each other," has now remained on the Short Hills Wildlife Alliance page for over 1 week. The mayor of St. Catharines has denounced the remarks and invited residents to Brock University to learn about Indigenous rights.
We're human beings, and we have the same cultural rights that everyone else has. So it's not okay to say, well, you need to evolve past eating meat, because it's our human right to choose what food we eat, where we do it, and when we do it.
The conference was an opportunity to engage public dialogue about both animal rights and human rights and to clear up misconceptions.
It's not hunting, it's harvesting. So it's important that people understand that. A hunt, when you go to hunt, you're there to kill something. We don't go to kill. We harvest for sustenance and for our traditions and for our culture and for ceremonies.
The harvest continues November 28th, December 5th, and January 16th. Elena McDougall, APTN National News, Thorold, Ontario.
We've got to take another break, but there's more news ahead, and here's the rest of tomorrow's weather. To northern Alberta, we got -9 for Fort McMurray and Fort Chip, and snow in those communities. -4 and snow for Edmonton and Calgary, -3 and snow in Lethbridge. 2 and sunshine for Penticton, -2 and sunny in Kamloops. -8 and snow in Fort Nelson, -4 and sunshine for Prince Rupert. -13 and clear skies for Dawson City. Rock River is -15 and sunny. -15 and sunshine for Norman Wells. -10 and snow in Wrigley. -17 and clear skies in Yellowknife. Tuck is -18 and clear skies. -16 for Inuvik. -5 and snow for Fort McPherson. -23 and sunshine for Baker Lake. -5 with a mist of sun and cloud in Arviat. Iqaluit, -20 and sunny skies. Goya Haven, -19 and snow. Same for Tallyoak. Welcome back. They have been used for thousands of years across the Arctic and serve as an important cultural symbol. Now, Inuit living in Yellowknife are learning how to make their very own ulus. Our reporter Charlotte Moore-Jacobs has this story.
It's a loud and dusty process. But one Annie Mitsima is grateful for.
She's making her very first ulu.
I find ulus to be very important in our culture, the Inuit world, because it's a tool of survival.
It's also the kickoff for workshops organized by the Yellowknife Moot Inuit Tagut Tagak Te'i, a relatively new and local not-for-profit which aims for more cultural teachings and events for Inuit in the capital city. Mitsima is learning from the best.
Take out all the marks.
Because Daryl Taylor is a natural teacher. He's an Inuvialuit carver, originally from Tuktoyaktuk, Northwest Territories.
As I'm teaching, I'm also learning from them because they've grown up using it before and I enjoy.
The ulu has been used for centuries. It's functional, powerful, and diverse design comes from this. And I mean a lot of this. It's a female-centric tool, so Taylor didn't have to look very far when he sought out advice in crafting one.
One of my sister's ulus that I had at home, and I use it as something to learn with how she done it. And
Mitsima says ulus are an important gift to give and receive in Inuit families.
I gifted my daughter my late mother's ulu, which was made before the 1960s, so my daughter can pass it on to my granddaughter.
Only a few are able to attend, till word of mouth prompts the organization. But it's not how many who attend, but the experience of those in attendance. Mitsima is a long way from her birth home in Iqaluit.
It makes me feel very much at home that I'm learning to make an ulu and to be amongst other Inuit.
Anouk 360, a local artist, is here with her mom. She says she has been waiting for more events in the city for Inuit.
For Inuit and having a gathering place for us to teach or learn or be together and enjoy each other and learn from each other.
Ulus are also a work of art in and of themselves. As a master tufter, Anouk 360 will use this for sewing.
Used for cutting pelts or making patterns, that's what was used. So there's different sizes, and depending on where you come from, you're gifted them, Annie?
I'm so happy to be doing this there.
Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
Well, that is your news for this Monday. You can get to the APTN News app on your smartphone if you've missed anything or you want to stay right up to date as it's happening. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Have a great night, and I'll leave you with the 2019 Grey Cup champion Winnipeg Blue Bombers arriving home with the long-awaited hardware. Have a good night.